Hi there, this is Brian, and I'm filling in for Ro, who's nursing a throat infection today. A lot of my love for food stems from a love for travel. When I'm not traveling myself, I watch travel food shows. Early on, I used to follow the shows by Rick Stein, David Rocco, and Luke Nguyen. One of Luke Nguyen's series focused on his home country of Vietnam, and in that, one of the dishes that caught my eye was pho. It was like my grandmother's beef soup, but with rice noodles and better vegetables, or rather fresher vegetables. Let me start by taking you through the ingredients. I'm going to separate the ingredients into two parts depending on where they're going to be used. The first is the ingredients for the broth. So these are as shown here: marrow bones, oxtail, slices of eye of round, ginger, cinnamon stick, black cardamom, star anise, green cardamom, coriander seeds, red onion, and fish sauce. Now I've taken a few liberties with the ingredients, like I've not used rock sugar, which is traditional. In fact, I've skipped the sugar altogether. But if you want it, you can use it. You can also add some vegetables to your broth. I suggest daikon radish and maybe other root vegetables like turnip or rutabaga. Once again, this isn't traditional, but it does add to the flavor. Next are the ingredients for the bowl, which are bean sprouts, rice noodles, shallot, pickled onions, pickled daikon radish, and limes. These are what's used when assembling the broth. Now I've skipped a couple, which you can add to your own few. One is fresh herbs, usually holy basil or Thai basil, mint and cilantro, and they do add a wonderful herbaceous freshness to the dish. The second is finely sliced raw beef. This is usually added to the bowl, and it cooks with the hot broth that's poured in. If using, I recommend buying pre-sliced raw beef that's prepared for Chinese or Korean hot pot. Place them in a large pot with cold water. This step is what's done traditionally, and it makes sense if you're in a part of the world where the bones aren't very clean and have blood on them. But if the bones are already clean and mostly white, you can skip the blanching. That, however, will increase the amount of skimming you have to do later. Place the pot on medium heat and bring to a boil. Let it boil for about half an hour, and then strain and discard the liquid. This is done to clean the bones. What fascinates me about food from around the world is how similar the ingredients are, and yet how the different ways of using those ingredients change the taste and result in a completely different dish. Pho, for example, is beef bone broth, but it uses spices for flavor instead of just the usual mix of vegetables and herbs. If you like bone broth, you'll love this. The recipe is very simple, but you have to focus on the technique and process. Now wash the bones with water, and using a clean pot, refill the water, add the bones back in, and place it back on medium heat. Now we add in the slices of the eye of round. You can also use other cuts of beef like chuck or brisket, and instead of slices, you can use a whole slab of meat, which you can cut into slices just before serving. I like to also add some dried squid to the broth for some additional flavor, but that's optional. Place the ginger and onion on a heated pan and roast them until they begin to char. Now drop them into the stock pot. For the full list of ingredients and recipe, check the description below. Roast the spices on a low heat until they start to release their aroma. Roasting brings the oils to the surface and helps intensify the flavor, but be careful not to let the spices burn. Now put them into a spice egg. If you don't have a spice egg, you can wrap the spices in a cheesecloth and tie it with butcher twine. Or you could just drop them in and fish them out before serving. And drop the egg into the broth. The egg will let the spices flavor the broth without being annoying while eating. And in goes the fish sauce. If you don't have fish sauce, you can use dashi or miso, but I highly recommend fish sauce. Now we just let it simmer for about 3 to 4 hours. This is the traditional Vietnamese method of cooking the broth, and the first boiling of the bones gets rid of most of the fat and impurities that usually form the foam at the top of the stock. That's why pho doesn't involve as much skimming. You can see some impurities rising to the surface. These are a combination of melted fat and coagulated protein that leaches from the bones. It can give the broth a bitter taste, and that's why we skim it off. I use a fine mesh strainer, but you can also just use a spoon. You'll have to skim the scum every 15 minutes or so. The goal is to get a clear broth. There is a shortcut to skimming, which involves the use of what we call a raft in culinary parlance. This is made with egg whites and ground beef blended together and dropped into the broth. The raft floats on top of the broth, and you need to continuously pour the broth over the raft, which clarifies it. The raft is then discarded at the end of the cook. The broth is now ready for serving. Let's cook up some rice noodles. These are very easy to cook. Just boil some water in a kettle, pour that over the noodles and let them sit. Let's cut some lime wedges for serving with the bowl and some shallot. You can use onion, but shallots are better. Now to assemble the bowl, put some noodles in the base, a slice of beef from the broth, some oxtail, and pour some broth over it all. Add some slices of shallot, a little pickled bacon, some pickled onion, and top it off with some bean sprouts. Serve with a wedge of lime. Let me know in the comments what you think of the recipe and if you've tried it out. And as usual, if you like my video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.